So here's the new Raspberry Pi 0W basic kit that I got from Amazon. It's Vilros, so we'll just take it apart and see what's in here. So basic power supply, we got that. We got a heat sink. The heat sink, we'll put that on. We've got a USB extender, so it's USB mini to a regular USB-A connection. Some case components. Now the small case comes with 3 lids. One's already on, and then there are 2 here, so we'll figure out what lid we want to put on there. You can swap it out later. There is an HDMI converter in the kit that goes from the smaller HDMI to a more standard HDMI connection. The Raspberry Pi 0W itself. The GPIO pins, we won't end up using those for this project. And the GPIO card explaining the pin outs, and again we're not going to need that, so pretty straightforward. I'm going to go ahead and drop some of this in, and then I'll bring video back on.
Because most of the Pi0 cases require you to insert the operating system card prior to installing the board in the case, we're going to go ahead and get the software ready now. Just go to raspberrypi.org. In this case, I'm downloading the Raspberry Pi OS with desktop. Once it's downloaded, you're going to need to put that image onto your SD card. Here I'm using Apple Pi Baker. There's Etcher.io. Even Raspberry Pi has their own software to do this, but basically what you want to do is make sure you select the SD card, select the appropriate image you downloaded, and let that write to disk, and that will put the image on the SD card so that you can just simply insert it into your Raspberry Pi or Raspberry Pi Zero in this case. Do be careful when you're completing this particular part of the process. You don't want to put that image onto your computer. Make sure you're putting it on the SD card. If you haven't seen a Pi0 before, I cannot stress to you how small this thing is. Fewer ports than the Raspberry Pi 4. Here we can see the unit itself with the micro SD card inserted. So think about the size of that micro SD card compared to this unit. It's very tiny. Here it is installed in the case. You basically just pop it in. You don't have to put screws in there. You can see the SD card doesn't really have a way to get in and out. There's no slot in this particular case. There may be other cases where that's not the situation. And here it is with the extension cables. So we've got an HDMI adapter, we've got the USB adapter, and the power plugged in. So let's boot it up. I'm going to speed up a lot of this process. It will take longer. The Pi0 is not as fast as the Raspberry Pi 4B. So the installation is the same as the previous videos I've done with the Raspberry Pi 4B. So we'll just go ahead, set our country, language, time zone. Here I'm on the East Coast outside Atlanta, Georgia. So I'm going to go ahead and set everything appropriately, select the keyboard, click next, and we'll move on to the next step. So it's going to go through a process of setting that localization. Once that's done, we suggest you change the password. Make sure you set that to something you will remember, but this will be your Pi account password. So we'll go ahead and do that here quickly, confirm it. Once that's done, I do have a black border on my screen, so I'm going to go ahead and say I do. After that, it's going to have me set up Wi-Fi. Notice Wi-Fi in the upper right-hand corner is not available yet, so I'll go ahead and select my Wi-Fi network, put in the appropriate SSID password. And then once that's done, if you watch the upper right-hand corner, you'll notice it'll go through trying to connect to the network, and eventually we'll have a solid signal. It'll take a few seconds for that to complete. And now we're going to go ahead and update the software. Now this has been sped up quite a bit. It's going to have to get the package lists, go through the updates, download all the software updates that are required, and then install all the updates. That will take a little bit of time. I sped that up quite significantly, so be prepared to have some time to monitor that. We'll go ahead and complete the setup by performing a reboot. Now the reboot is going to go through a couple things as well. So it's going to go through, you'll notice that we'll get a splash screen here. It'll load all the software and it'll bring us back to the desktop. Now once back at the desktop, we are going to go and make one modification here. We're not going to go ahead and change the name. There's a lot of things you can do at this point, but we're going to keep it simple. So really the only thing I want to do here is turn on SSH, and that's just so I could actually get to it over the network from a command line. That's really up to you. Now I'm going to go back to Thomas's Allsky page, just like we did in the earlier video. I do want to thank Thomas. He liked the video I put up originally, and he did link it to his README docs here, so certainly have a look at that video as well with the Raspberry Pi 4. So what we're going to do here is, in order to complete this install, I'm going to SSH in from my Mac. So on my Mac, I'll open a terminal session and I'm going to SSH to pi@raspberrypi.local. That's the current name. I do have to type yes to accept the key, and then I'm going to go ahead and put the new password in that I just changed. Now from here, I'm just following the steps on Thomas's page. So what we're actually going to do is clone his GitHub repository to our system. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And again, a lot of these steps can take much more time. You can see this is sped up here, especially on the Pi0. It's a little bit, can be a little bit longer, particularly when you get to the installation steps. So now that it's cloned, we're going to cd into the Allsky directory. And then we are going to sudo the installation, so install.sh. And we're going to let the install occur. Again, this can take a bit of time. So now that we're at the end of that install process, we need to do a reboot. So we'll go ahead and hit yes here, and we'll allow the reboot to occur. That will kick us out of our SSH session. So now we will reconnect via SSH after that reboot completes. And again, this can take a little bit of time with the Pi0, but shouldn't be too bad. So we'll put our new password in for the Pi account. And once we are connected post-installation, we can continue onward. Now I'm going to try to make it a little bit easier for you. There are a lot of configuration settings and files you can manipulate, but we're going to go ahead and configure the graphical interface. So to do that, we are going to scroll down Thomas's GitHub page, and we will cd into the Allsky directory. That's one step that's not in the README here, but make sure you're in the Allsky directory, because what we're looking for is the GUI folder. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll go into Allsky, and then just to show you, if you do an ls here, you can see the GUI folder is in here, and we can do a sudo GUI/install.sh, and I'm going to set my system name here, and in this case, I'm going to call it ZeroSky. And we're going to go ahead and commit this and allow the install to complete. And again, I'll speed this process up pretty dramatically as well. Now, if you did choose to change the system name, do pay attention that that's how you're going to connect to it from now on. So in my case, it'll be zerosky.local, or the IP address, and do note that the GUI password is secret and the username is admin. It is not the Pi account for the GUI, and we'll show you that here in a second. So the GUI install completed, we selected yes to reboot. It kicked us out of our SSH session, of course, as the system shut down. We're going to let the system reboot, and then we can reconnect to it here momentarily. You can take some of these reboot opportunities to scroll further down on his page as well. He does have a donation section. I do suggest you donate if you have a few extra dollars laying around. A lot of effort goes into this software. So go ahead and log in. Notice it was admin and secret, so it's pretty easy to do. We'll get in, And one of the first things you're going to do once you've connected is we're going to make some modifications for our specific setup. First thing we want to do in the UI is change the password for that admin account. We don't want to leave it as secret, so we'll go ahead and do that. Now when I try to connect to something else, because I've changed the admin password, it's going to force another authentication. So I'll go ahead and re-authenticate with the new password, and then we can get into some of the configuration options. So you can look and see as you click around, everything is functional. So we can look at our configuration status, we can see our wireless connection, our IP address. We have the typical options. We have CPU is not coming back quite yet, so we don't have that data, but we can see everything else is reporting as expected. And we can go to light mode or dark mode. So just like the Pi4, I mean, it's the same exact software, it's just running on a smaller form factor. So now we're going to go ahead and make some basic changes to the configuration for the camera here. So I'm going to go ahead and increase the maximum exposure time to 45 seconds or 45,000 milliseconds. And I'm going to make a change to the gain here based on my camera. So right now I'm connected via an ASI224MC from ZWO. So I'm going to go ahead, go to their web page. They have these great charts, and I'm going to use unity gain. So unity gain here is 135. Notice in the bottom chart we do get some benefits when we cross 60, getting some read noise drop off, but I'm going to go ahead and use unity gain as a starting point. This can be trial and error over several nights, trying to fine-tune a number of these settings. So be prepared to try to take some time to do that. I'm going to go ahead and grab some lat longe coordinates for something near my location. So I'll go ahead and add that as well. But again, there's not a lot you're required to manipulate here, just some basic modifications. I'm not going to do any dark frame subtraction or anything like that just yet. So this is what it looks like. I've got two rigs running tonight, but if you look here, I'm using the AC power, and that is the Pi0. It's pretty small. I really don't think you can tell how small it is. I've got a USB cable running from there over just to a simple cheap tripod, the 224MC covered in pollen, and basic fisheye lens. So it's pretty tiny, and it is running. So I'm going to connect to it via my iPhone. So again, as I connect to it, I'm just connecting to 0sky.local because I renamed it. Log in with the admin account and password, and we can see we're getting images back from that 225. Now, I need to fine tune some of the parameters eventually so that it's not quite as bright. I'll come back to my computer, log in again here to get a little bit of a wider form factor. It's a little bit easier to use on a computer than the iPhone. And we can see that, yep, the images are updating, so we're getting new images to come in. You know, I may need to do some things with focus. There's a lot of parameters to manipulate, but it is fully functional. I can come back and see I've got a good wireless link. We're getting inbound and outbound packets. If I look at the system information, we can see the CPU is running relatively low, temperature's good, disk is good, memory's good. And this is, again, the Pi0 running for a couple hours at this point with Allsky software. So if I go look at images, again, I just started capturing images. So I'm going to speed this up. It's pulling back a lot of thumbnails. So you can see that the data is coming back. I've got a lot of ugly pictures at the beginning from when I was setting the system up. But we can see the data is coming back. I probably need to manipulate some of my gain and exposure lengths to get this to be something that I'd be happy with, but we're pretty good to go. Yep, so again, light mode, dark mode, everything is to be expected. And let's check on it the next day. So a little bit forward in time here. We can see the time lapse has been generated. And, you know, while I need to manipulate some things, maybe work on focus, I can see that the Pi0 the next morning did create the time lapse I expected. What's funny here is that all of my reports said I would have 0 cloud cover at all levels, but this is why I use an all sky camera, so I can monitor the night sky. You can obviously see cloud cover going through that's going to impact my imaging session. Now this is with the 224MC camera and fisheye lens, but let's talk about the new Raspberry Pi HQ camera. This is a very powerful camera, very, very low cost, connected here via a ribbon cable. And you can see the relative size. Again, it does not add much of a footprint at all to the Pi0. So we're talking about something that's much cheaper even than a 120 MC from ZWO as another inexpensive alternative. So we can see that it's connected here, pretty straightforward. Comparing the image sensor size, the RPi HQ on the left here, very similar sensor size. Now, certainly the specs are different. The full well capacity of the 224MC is much better. There's a number of reasons you probably want to go with a ZWO camera in this particular case, but again, as an inexpensive, low power alternative, the HQ camera is very impressive. You can see how small it is. I've got it connected via the ribbon cable. The box and the Pi0 is just dangling from it. The HQ camera has a threaded connection on the bottom to connect to a tripod mount. So here I've just got my tripod mount turned 90 degrees pointing directly upward, and it's connected that way. So pretty straightforward, very, very simple to get going. Now there are a couple things you need to do to get the HQ camera to be recognized by the Pi. So let's look at that briefly here. So what we need to do first is we need to connect via SSH to our Raspberry Pi. So I go ahead and do that. And once I'm in there, you're going to do a sudo raspi-config, and that's going to bring us to this setting here. Go to interface settings, go to camera, and then say you want to enable the camera interface. So pretty straightforward. Basically enable the camera interface, and then we can jump right back out. Now if we go back into our Allsky software via the web browser, again in this case using zerosky.local, you'll notice that our camera settings have changed. It doesn't look like the ZWO anymore. It's recognized the HQ camera here, and I can make additional modifications. One thing you do want to do though, especially with the Pi0, is you're going to want to go in and take a look at the config.sh file. So we're going to scroll down, and in particular, the one thing you do want to change is this image resize. So go ahead and set that to true and set your image width and image height and image width to a smaller number. You can use these settings here for 1442 and 1080. You can even go smaller than that. The reason we're doing that is because that 12 megapixel camera will make large images that will ultimately be problematic for the Pi0 when it's trying to create your time lapses in the morning. So we can see that we're getting images back from this camera. We've got one image right now. If I give it a few seconds and I go back to the live view, we should see another image roll in from the RPi HQ camera. So we'll see the image come in. It'll be a subtle movement, some cloud cover barely moved. So you can actually see some subtle movement, and that we're getting multiple images. And again, if I go back to images, I can see that I'm getting a couple things coming in here. Yep, so we should be good. That camera's working. Again, it needs to be fine-tuned, just like the ZWO camera. We need to work on focus. We need to work on the color calibration. We need to work on the exposure time, the gain. In the morning, I'd move this over near the bushes. We had some people that needed to drive out of the driveway. So this is me checking on it the next morning. And I'm not going to bore you with the time lapse. Just know that it took pictures all night. I obviously, after looking at these images that I'll show you here, I do need to work on some color calibration as different lights came on, and headlights and different street lights and neighbors' lights came on. I had some different discoloration of the sky and night sky around me, so it's something that I'm going to have to play with a little bit. But you can see I got all the images to come in with the HQ camera on the Pi0. And the other thing I wanted to show you here specifically is the keyogram. The keyogram is a powerful way to quickly look at your previous night's cloud cover issues. So what we do with the keyogram is basically every image you took over the evening, we're going to take a 1 pixel slice from top to bottom, north to south, from the middle of every picture, and then we're going to lay them from left to right across the keyogram image. So you see they stack up from left to right. And we can see at 2 a.m., at 3 a.m., at 4 a.m., at 5 a.m., at 6 a.m. Through the evening, we can see what the center of every image was seeing. So we can start to see when did we have clouds, when did we have cloud cover, and how was it moving. Hopefully this helps you. Hopefully you enjoyed this. And please subscribe and look for more videos to come.